system itself. You a little bit about the health outcomes and about how, although there is an improvement compared to other countries, compared to our own situation in relation to our economic progress, we are not doing very well. What one indicator of the health system in any country, and that's not the only, and it doesn't always work, but it is an important indicator, is how much the state spends on the health system. So that is something where, again, India does abysmally badly. As a proportion of GDP, the spending on healthcare in India, that is the public health spending, central government, state government, various local governments all put together, has been hovering between about 0.9% of the GDP to about 1.2% of the GDP over the last many, many, many years. Post the National Health Mission, it kind of crossed that 1.1% GDP mark, but then it has remained kind of stagnant there again over the last decade or a little more than that. And that, if we again compare across the world, is amongst the lowest. Some of the poorest countries in this world also spend more than what India is spending on health. Just to give you some examples, firstly, of the richer countries. For example, say Germany spends almost 10% of its GDP. This is government expenditure on health, is almost 10%. The UK spends about 8% of its GDP. The US, surprisingly, which has the most health system in the world, even there the government spends 17% of the GDP on health. And that is a point I would like to come back later when I discuss the kind of health strategy that we seem to be going towards. But basically, for now, the point being that India has had an extremely low kind of spending on health for a very long time. There was a slight improvement after around the early 2000s, but since it has still stagnated. And this goes against all the kind of policy declarations of the Indian government, various governments, where be it the UPA or the NDA, there are a number of documents where we have set deadlines for ourselves and promised the country that we would spend at least 2.5% and move towards spending 3% of GDP. We've reached nowhere close to that. And this is reflected in a number of things. The first most visible thing in which this is reflected, and which is what the government then tries to address through programs like the Ayushman Bharat, is the increasing burden of out-of-pocket spending on healthcare that people have. So basically, if the government is not spending on healthcare, people still fall ill, they need to take care of themselves, and incomes are slightly rising. So what people are spending on healthcare from their own pockets in a context where employer-provided insurance is not very widespread in India is something which is very high. So if we look at the division between out-of-pocket private spending and government spending, India has almost 2/3 of all health spending in India happens out of the pocket. This again is amongst the highest in the world. So for instance, all of these countries, UK, France, even US, Canada, Germany, all these countries spend less than 15%. Many spend less than 10% of their total expenditure out of pocket. Most of the health expenditure is taken care of either by public health expenditure and public services or by some sort of an insurance, which is usually where the premiums are shared between the person and the employer. So having this high out-of-pocket burden is something that is, once again, unique to India and a few other developing countries, where 2/3 of our health spending is out of pocket, which basically means that this is, again, not all of this is predicted spending. And therefore, what is called in the health economics terminology as catastrophic health spending is very high. So basically, where the spending on health is more than, say, around 10% of your entire expenditures, when it becomes catastrophic, and that burden is also high in India. There is one estimate that about 8% of people in this country are pushed below the poverty line because of health-related expenditures. There is also other studies which have shown that after dowry, health is the biggest reason for which people become indebted across the country, which is to do with health expenditures. So out-of-pocket health expenditure is a big concern, and having such out-of-pocket health expenditure also affects health-seeking behavior, where people would try to avoid seeking healthcare unless it is absolutely necessary or unavoidable. So we have these twin problems of the government spending too little, and because of that, people having to spend a high amount from their own pockets on healthcare. So this is one of the main problems that the health sector in our country faces. Why has this happened? This has basically happened because the public health system has been completely it was never built to the extent that it should have been built, and even what we had post the liberalization period has been suffering from great neglect. And there has been an unregulated rise of the private sector, much to the, having great, at the same time, the public sector being ignored. One way in which we are seeing that the public sector is being ignored is, of course, that the spending on health has not improved, and that it has remained more or less stagnant for a very, very long time. So if we look at where is it that people go to access healthcare, we see that there also that most people are now accessing healthcare in the private sector. So in outpatient care, for instance, which is where you just go to the doctor and for whatever illness you have, it's only 32% of the population in rural areas and about 26% of the population in urban areas that go to a government facility. And much of this is usually maternal care, immunization, delivery, and so on. But otherwise, most outpatient care now is taken care of by the private sector. In hospitalization, it's slightly better, where almost 46% of rural hospitalization cases happens in government hospitals, and about 1/3 of urban hospitalization cases happens in urban areas happens in government hospitals. So, so we see that the private sector is the sector which is providing most of the health care in our country currently, with the people accessing governments and hospitals much less, and the government hospitals also being under-resourced and understaffed and not having enough facilities. This becomes much more of a problem also because the private sector in our country is completely unregulated, and across the world in developed or developing countries, and those of you who are from economics background or even otherwise, it makes common sense also that health is not a commodity which the market can provide. There are all kinds of market failures that are involved in the provision of healthcare, and also from a human rights kind of perspective, health is something that should be available. Healthcare is something that should be available for anyone who needs it, and there is an equity aspect that comes into health. And therefore, governments across the world, whatever kind of government it is, play a very big role in provision of healthcare. There are, of course, different kinds of models. So while the UK has the national health system where it directly provides healthcare, Germany has a universal insurance system where it very closely regulates both the insurance companies as well as the providers and the prices and so on. What we have in our country is this very strange system where the state is not involved in direct provision of healthcare, neither is it involved in regulation of the private sector. So what we have is something called the Clinical Establishments Bill, which has to be passed by state governments because health is a state subject. And the last count I know of, only about 5 states in India had even passed the Clinical Establishment Act, which is the basis on which you can regulate the private sector. And the lobby of the private sector doctors and the whole industry, much more than the doctors, is also so strong that they resist any kind of regulation happening there. And what does that result in? It results in completely unregulated prices, different kind of care for people based on affordability. And in health, there is this whole asymmetric information where the patient most often does not know what is best for them. And therefore, you have what is called supplier-induced demand, where you unnecessary kind of diagnostics, medicines, procedures are conducted because of their profitability. So on the one side, we have this kind of heterogeneous private sector which is spread across the country, which ranges from unqualified medical practitioners who happen to be, in most cases, for the poor, the first port of call when they're not well, which in many parts in around Delhi, for instance, they're known as Bengali doctors, yeah, jholawalas, who are basically the first people who are available for people to access when they have a fever or a headache or a cough or any such thing. So the private sector ranges from these Bengali doctors, Jholawalas, to the huge corporate international, corporate hospitals, which now have a lot of foreign investments as well, like say the Max Hospital or the Apollo hospitals and so on. None of this is regulated, and all of them have various issues in terms of the quality of care that they provide, as well as their the prices at which that they provide care. On the other hand, what we have in the public sector is also, unfortunately, because of the underfunding that I talked about, very poor quality of care. Just to give you some, and this is the figures I'm going to just tell you now is the improved figures after the National Health Mission was started in 2005. Just to give you some examples, and the examples I'm giving are from the rural health statistics, which the health ministry releases every year. So this is from the 2019 report. So we have something called the Indian Public Health Standards, the IPHS norms, which basically lays out the human resources and infrastructure and basic facilities that any health facility should have. So based on the IPH, and these norms are different for a sub-center, for a primary health center, for a community health center, and so on. Now, based on the IPHS norms, only 10% of the sub-centers in our country and less than 10% of the primary health centers in our country are functioning as per these IPHS norms, even by the government's own reports. When we are talking about other basic kind of infrastructure, now sub-centers are the closest. For every 5,000 population in a rural area, you're supposed to have a sub-center, and that's where people go for their first when basic primary kind of care, but this does not work like that anywhere in the country. But if you look at these sub-centers, 20% of the sub-centers do not even have regular water supply, and 26% are without electricity. This is in 2019, last year. Primary health centers are the next level of care, which are supposed to now even provide delivery care. So that is normal deliveries happen in primary health centers, so they have to function all day. Again, based on the government's data, only 40% of the primary healthcare centers operate on a 24/7 basis. There are huge vacancies in human resources at all levels. There are doctors' positions vacant, there are nurses' positions vacant, there are positions of lab technicians, pharmacists, etc., vacant, ranging up to vacancies of 60 to 70% against the posts that have been sanctioned for these various designations. Another huge shortage and crisis is to do with the lack of specialists. So, for instance, obstetrician gynecologists in a community health center, which is supposed to be able to do a cesarean section if necessary, of the 3,334 positions that were sanctioned for these OBGYNs, 2,135 were lying vacant as on last year. That is again 3/4, more than 2/3 of the positions lying vacant. So in this context, just think of COVID and this spreading across the country, where we have a health system, forget ventilators and ICUs, which is what will feel the pressure if COVID spreads, from what we are seeing internationally, that 80% of the cases would be mild and moderate, 20% would require hospitalization, and maybe 5% of that would require an ICU care and ventilation. I mean, we don't even have data on how many ventilators are available, but forget ventilators, forget ICUs, forget specialists. We have still not even achieved a health system where there is regular water supply, where there's electricity, where there are nurses, where there are basic qualified who are able to respond to the demand that people might that the demand that the kind of disease burden in our country demands. So it is on the back of this kind of a health system that we are faced with a crisis. So I will just move on to the COVID crisis in a minute. Just one more aspect of the health system that I just want to spend 2 minutes on is the whole issue of the frontline workers. Because once again, when we are talking about this kind of a health system and this kind of an infection like COVID, and in fact, most of the health functions that our country requires, like immunization, like awareness, like nutrition counseling, primary basic care in the community. All of this depends on the frontline workers. And who are the frontline workers? The first layer, the frontline workers who live in the villages, who are closest to people, whom people access for basic things if they fall, have an injury, if they need an injection, and so on, are the Anganwadi workers and the Ashas. Now, our country, and all these are women. There are 14 lakh Anganwadi workers, there are about 8 lakh Asha workers, and there are about 14 lakh Anganwadi helpers in the country. Now, this force of women who could be who are performing some of the most important tasks in the country. And today, if we want to go to do screening at the community level, if you want to isolate all these migrants who are going back, it is these workers on whose shoulders this burden is falling. Forget PPE. I don't think, I mean, even before we talk about PPE for these workers, their conditions of work have been abysmal, and they have not even been recognized as workers, even by the Supreme Court. So the government calls them honorary, voluntary workers who are paid an honorarium. They're not even paid a salary. An Anganwadi worker today gets, different states have different amounts, but somewhere around 5 to 6,000 rupees a month. An ASHA worker does not even get that much. What an ASHA worker gets is an incentive based payment. So if she accompanies a pregnant woman to the hospital, she gets 600 rupees. If she makes sure that a child has received all the immunizations that she needs to get from birth to measles at 9 months, then she'll get some 150 rupees. So that is how her work is recognized. They are not trained on a regular basis because of court orders. They filled positions, but they have a huge training backlog. They don't have trainers. They don't have a system of passing on information to them. And anything fails, both the community as well as the higher ups in the health and women and child development departments, basically the scapegoat becomes this frontline worker who is an ASHA or an Anganwadi worker, sometimes even an ANM who's slightly better paid. She's a nurse, but who has her own set of issues again, where she has to travel to 5, 6 villages. She does not have a travel allowance. She does not have a vehicle, and so on. So we have a health system which has been crumbling, which has not got the resources it needs, and where the human resources are also not treated with any kind of a respect. And in this context, sorry, before 2, 3 minutes more before I get on to COVID, what has been the focus of our governments in addressing this crisis in the health system? In 2005, something called the National Rural Health Mission was initiated, and that then an urban health mission was added onto it, and it became the National Health Mission, which did start off in the right tone, where its main focus was to strengthen the government health system, particularly at the primary level. So they made some increases in funding that the central government provided, with the poorer performing states being provided more funding, and streamlined the whole fund flow mechanism and the whole governance mechanism as far as primary care was concerned. Post the NHM, now there's a lot of evidence and studies that show that, particularly in relation to maternal and child health outcomes, which is what the NHM largely focused on in its initial phase, there have been the rate at which these outcomes improved did increase after the NHM. And like everything else in this country, here also, of course, there was a huge state-wise difference, where states which had better capacity, which again turned out to be a lot of the southern states, made use of the NHM much better and effectively than states, say, like Bihar and UP, which were not able to use their funds and which did not do as much. But even in these states, we see an expansion of institutional deliveries. We see that primary health centers have got buildings that they didn't have earlier. And there was some kind of energy that came into the health system post the National Health Mission. But however, from around 2012 onwards, the pressure, which is from UPA 2 itself, The pressure at that time in the Planning Commission, now in the Niti Aayog, in various documents, what you saw is this shift in focus away from strengthening the public health system towards, again, looking for private solutions for the healthcare problem of people. So making out-of-pocket expenditure burden the kind of excuse, what we saw was this coming up of various government-sponsored health insurance schemes. So nationally, the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana was this, and many states like Andhra Pradesh was a pioneer in this with its scheme called Arogyasri. Many states started other schemes where basically what the government said was that for the primary care and outpatient, we are doing National Health Mission. For hospitalization, which is where the costs are much higher, we don't think that the government needs to invest much more and expand its capacities. The private sector is already there. So we will start an insurance scheme where the poor people will not have to pay premium. The government will pay the premium and people can go to private sector to get their hospitalization care. Now, that is the model which Modi 2 years back expanded through the what is now called the Ayushman Bharat scheme, where basically the government, either through a trust or through private insurance companies, different states have different models, provides an insurance cover to poor people. Where each family is covered for up to 5 lakh rupees expenditure per year. There are huge issues again with this, issues to do with targeting, issues to do with who gets covered and so on, which if there is interest in the questions I can take up. But the main, in this context, the problem here again is that on one side you have a health system where the private sector is not regulated at all. And on the other side, you are coming up with solutions for healthcare for people, which is kind of moving them up even more away from the public sector towards private sector, which is not regulated, whose main objective is profit making, like it is, because it is a business like any other business. And we already see some of the problems because, for instance, some of you might have seen it in the newspapers also. There was this whole hysterectomy scandal where it was found that because hysterectomy was one of those profitable procedures under these insurance packages, that many women who did not even probably need them, young women less than 35 years of age, hospitals were doing hysterectomies on them because it was a profitable, it was induced by this whole health insurance. It's called cherry picking procedures, again, in the health economics literature. Similarly, cataract surgeries. So if you look at the coverage of different diseases under these government-sponsored health insurance schemes, you find that it has a disproportionate coverage of certain procedures, which are cheaper for the hospital, possibly not required, but something where they make money in those packages. The other problem of the shift towards the private sector is also that, and this across the world, there is evidence to show that as these health insurance programs are cost escalating because the private sector keeps demanding more and more for the packages that they're providing, and they take even the meager funds available in the health sector away from the primary and preventive kind of measures towards these kind of insurance schemes which cover only hospitalization expenditure. In India, already in last 2 years budget, we see that each year the budget for Ayushman Bharat increased a bit, and that much amount was cut from the National Health Mission budget. In Andhra Pradesh, where the scheme has lasted longer, there are studies which show that it diverted resources away from primary and secondary level cares to more and more tertiary hospitalization care, which was mostly going into the pockets of the private sector, not even in strengthening public sector hospitals. Now, when we come to a context like the COVID-19 infection, it is the public sector which has to respond, and it is the primary level care that becomes most important. So what we have been seeing is this primary care has never been primary level provision of care other than family planning was never on the agenda in our country. It kind of came into the agenda sometime back, but once again, because of this whole insurance focus, the Ayushman Bharat, RSBY, much smaller in scale before that. Once again, that the focus, the expenditures, and the energy is being shifted away from primary preventive kind of care. Along with this, a very narrow understanding of health itself, being limited to disease and access to healthcare, whereas we have to remember that health is much more than just getting medicines and injections and surgeries, that ultimately, if we want to tackle the disease problems, it's a lot to do with what is called social determinants. And without getting into gender and caste and all of that, which are very important determinants of what health outcomes are, even the immediate determinants like nutrition and sanitation is something where India does very poorly. I don't have time to go into it, but it is something that we need to remember, that even in the context of COVID, it's a new virus. We don't know exactly how it will behave, but usually we do know that such infections, people with more susceptible, and people with lower immunity are usually also people who are malnourished. So this whole burden of malnutrition that we have, which is also again to do with the access to food, the access to nutrition, access to health services, and so on, they're all linked. It is in this context, if the spread happens, it can be something quite disastrous, because it might affect the poor much more than the rich in our country. So in this, it is in this context that this lockdown, the COVID-19 has come. What should the response have been? So firstly, of course, like I said, it is quite a sad story, and the situation in which our health system is, it is. We should have been preparing. Like, I think one of the Jan Swasthya Abhiyan notes that we did, it says that we should have been preparing this for 15 years. Then maybe we would have been able to deal with it. But we don't have 15 years, so we really need to step up and gear our entire public health system, and even take over, at least regulate, in some ways direct the private system to respond to this crisis, which has to be in multiple ways of expanding the capacity in the entire health system. So there was a 15,000 crores which has been announced for the health sector, which came like 3 days after the lockdown was also announced. Now, any amount of money is welcome, but in this context, 15,000 crores is very low, because, like I said, the health system is in such a poor state that the 15,000 crores would just get used in just getting basic functions in place. But it's good that something has begun, and we'll have to see how it will be spent. And we are also hoping that this is not a one-time thing, and it will actually continue. And this is a beginning, at least now that we understand the importance of the health system. It has been a very slow kind of response, but some things are beginning to happen. For instance, there is now, companies have been sanctioned for production of test kits within the country. So we will have many more test kits available. But the estimate is that we need to be able to do at least 1 lakh tests per day, but maybe we'll reach only about 30,000, the capacity to do 30,000 by the end of the lockdown period. Finally, in mid-March, we stopped the export of ventilators, and the government has given orders for many more, but ventilators are something that don't come so soon. So hopefully that will happen very soon. And even there, a proper deployment is needed. We'll have to see what are the ventilators available in the private sector, how are they being used. This is where the government will need to step in once again. PPE, I know that your group has also been, even in your statement, there was a strong statement about PPE being available to health workers. And once again, big disaster. We do not have the capacity to produce enough. We have stopped the export of PPE. Government is placing orders, but it is very clear that, again, it has to be really stepped up on how this is done, and that various healthcare workers can have access to it. Currently, this whole system where PPE is not provided, health workers are falling ill, and then quarantining the whole hospital is something which can have huge public health ramifications if this is continued, because then health services, already meager health services, become even lower. So in Delhi, for example, there was this case 2 days back, where the Gangaram Hospital, from the Gangaram Hospital, the government made 108 health workers go into quarantine, whereas we don't know how many of them will be positive or not, which obviously will affect how much services is given there. There is also, these are the kind of positive things, some of the things that has been already done. So because I'm focusing on health sector, I'm not going into the issues with the lockdown. But there are some issues to do with the lockdown which are also affecting the health services, which I just want to spend a minute on. So this national lockdown, of course, has had huge impact on livelihoods and access to food, but also this whole thing of there are so many ways in which it is also we don't know what the impact will be on health of people, not because of COVID, but because of other reasons as well. So, for instance, say TB. We are getting ground reports from many parts of the country that TB patients are not getting their next set of round of drugs because of the lockdown. HIV patients are not able to access drugs because of the lockdown, either because there are no public transport facilities for them to go to the health facility, or many health facilities have just closed down their OP services, outpatient services, where they're not functioning at the same scale at which they used to function for anything which is not COVID. So again, we don't know if this will result in an MDR-TB burden increasing, how many people are not able to get the medicines. These are figures we don't have. There are also reports that even the routine immunization has stopped. So in a day, I think the number was something like 80,000 women deliver in our country. So if the antenatal, postnatal, all these services are stopped, they have no idea where the women are going, how this is happening, are they having to spend more. This is information we're not getting, but we do know from various micro kind of reports that say the Jan Swasthya Abhiyan, the Right to Food campaign, we are hearing from our partners across the country that a lot of people who would otherwise have gone to the health center because of whatever other complaints are now not going because they're not able to, because there is no public transportation available. And the health services have been really affected, where essential health services have either been shut down or have they've been entirely diverted for responding to COVID, and that is something that our country cannot afford. So, and the point of the lockdown, point of doing all this was to delay the peak, and it would make sense, which is what the WHO was also repeatedly saying, that if you do such a lockdown, it makes sense if you're using this period to strengthen your health system. So, like I said, we are doing a little bit in terms of trying to increase our capacity of ventilators and protective equipment, but we need to do much more in terms of screening, in terms of testing, and then isolating. So it is becoming quite clear that what we need possibly is a more graded kind of a lockdown than what we are currently seeing. And whatever kind of lockdown it is, it needs much more testing to happen. And this whole kind of diversion into stage 2, stage 3, are we in local transmission, community transmission, at one level makes no sense. Those are not the stages that the WHO is using. It makes no sense in the Indian context, given our very stringent rules for who is tested and who's not tested. Right now, enough people are not tested for us to even know what transmission is happening. And mild and moderate cases are just not don't make it to the testing criteria at all. And most cases in COVID are mild and moderate. So this is something where there's a big gap, and we really need to expand our testing. And so what we have also been saying as the Jan Swasthya Abhiyan to do with this is two things. One is to expand testing, and then to do the tracing and the isolation based on that kind of a testing. We hope that this lockdown will not continue after the 15th of April in this form. It has to be done in a more sensible kind of a manner, because all the other kind of impacts that it is having, and the what they're calling collateral damage, none of us know what the costs of this is. And we must know that there are 30,000 women who die in pregnancy in 1 year in our country. 1 million children die of preventable causes under the age of 5. 2 lakh people succumb to tuberculosis in a year. We don't know if there is going to be an increase in all this because of the reduction in access to services because of this thing. And that needs to be counted in the deaths and the costs when we are looking at whether the lockdown is a useful strategy or not to continue. We, of course, need some kind of a strategy, but whether this kind of blanket thing works is something that really needs to be thought about. The second thing is, again, how the health system is responding to this, on whether it is right to just stop giving all kinds of other services and just to COVID. Rather, what needs to be done is to have special arrangements in outpatient clinics so that there is screening, and COVID patients are screened out first and segregated into a separate flow. We need to set up these kind of fever clinics or within the existing clinics where the COVID symptom patients are separated into a separate flow, and then social distance is maintained and PPE is given and so on, without compromising the safety of the health service providers. But closing all other health services could be very damaging. And that is something also that needs to be considered very soon. So we need to have separate OPs, and even in ICUs and so on, we need isolation wards and separate wards. But this whole thing of just stopping providing all other services is something that is dangerous. So just to conclude, that and to try and conclude on a positive note also, is that the hope from all of this is that it has brought public health to the forefront. It has brought a lot of attention on our public health system. You can see the gaps, you can see what is needs to be done, and this can really be seen as kind of an opening to really strengthen our public health system and work on a war footing, which is something that the health system in India needed always. So if this is seen as the beginning to do that, and not as something that somehow we will wait through the next 2-3 months and then life will continue as normal, then that would be a disaster. But if we now learn our lessons, this really could be the opportunity where we move on to spending much more on health and to regulating the private sector and to strengthening the public health system. So I will stop here, and you could maybe ask questions either by voice or on chat.
Thank you, Deepa. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, there are some chat which I didn't.
I think it's only about comments.
Okay.
I think Rohit will now kind of moderate questions and then discuss. Rohit,
Hi.
are you there?
I'm there. Hi, thank you, Deepa, for this lucid presentation and very fascinating discussion on public healthcare. What I would suggest is that okay, so people have started. Oh, this is Nagraj only. So there are two options. One option is that you can type your question on the chat window. The other is you can just say. But if you're asking a question, then I would request you to first put your name on the window, because right now there are quite a few people who have just written fellow Jitster, in which case we don't know who that person is. And the way you can do it is you just click on your on that three dots on your right and change just your name at the top, and then it will also doesn't matter, we can just take questions without naming, or you can write your name and then ask the questions in case your computer doesn't show your name. So that's one, just logistically speaking. So yeah, and if you're asking questions by voice, then there's also this option of raising your hand. I don't know if you can see, which is on your left, where there's a screen sharing, and when you raise your hand, you have the possibility of, but it doesn't matter. I think it's just easier to ask questions in chat or unmute yourself and ask questions. We can take a couple of questions at a time. Deepa, would that be what you would want, or how do we do this? Whatever you prefer.
Yeah. So what's coming on the chat, I can just keep responding.
Okay. Okay, so there are two questions. Why don't you respond to those, and then we can.
Yeah, I'll start with that, and by then you can figure out who's.
Yeah. Okay.
So both the questions are related to health systems in China and South Korea, and then also Kerala. I think it is health system related. I mean, they're related questions. And I do think that it's not just testing. Yes, it is. And even to be able to test, you need a better health system in the first place. One of the reasons, I mean, the conspiracy theory is that we are not testing because we are too scared to know what the real numbers are. But it's also the case that our testing capacity is very low. I mean, to even have one testing center in every state took us a very, very long time. And we don't have the kits, we don't have the capacity. That is even in related to testing, the health system needed to be more robust. But these countries also have robust health systems in terms of universal access to people are in the health system net already. And when you have a functioning health system and something like this happens, it's obviously easier to handle it than otherwise. So in the case of Kerala as well, Kerala, I could elaborate a little more. It's not a question of only the current left government. In fact, the UDF and the LDF in Kerala behave kind of similarly when it comes to some of these basic. I mean, politics in Kerala itself has been more left of center for a very long time, and health has been one of those things. They had much more functioning, better quality primary health centers, which are under the control of the panchayat. They decentralized, for instance, when so there used to be the story that in Kerala, there was once a case where this person went for a delivery to a primary health center and the doctor was not there. And the whole village went looking for him and found him watching a movie in a cinema hall, and he was caught and said, "Come and do the delivery." So that is, I mean, just as an example of that's the kind of monitoring that happens there. And so, because there is, for instance, Kerala, one of the first things they thought of was distributing cooked food of the midday meal to the homes. But they had a system and a cadre which was able to do this. They have their Kudumbashri groups, they have their functioning panchayat, and they have their functioning health system, which is able to respond to this in a sensitive kind of a manner. And that is the left politics in the state definitely contributed to it. But the left has had an influence over the overall politics in the state right from the 50s itself, which has led to better outcomes in Kerala in general in health as well. Um,